When in doubt, ram it. Battle stations. Battle stations. Man is spotted, bearing 335, hot. Welcome, carrier commanders. This is Kazzik again with a video on helmsman and repair screens. The controls are fairly basic. Once you click on the steering wheel, you'll get pulled into position. The W and S keys are your throttle. It'll stick in position, and of course your A and D keys become your steering wheel. You have to hold it in position unless you click the steering lock button, which will allow you to release the A key and continue to pull a left-hand turn. You can, of course, unclick the steering lock switch and it will snap back into the middle position and travel basically in a straight line. If you want to maintain a specific heading, if your captain gives you a specific heading of, say, 040 degrees, you turn until your compass screen says 040, and then when you get closer, you can sort of feather the steering wheel until it gets to the exact heading you want, and then flip the maintain heading switch. I don't know why they decided to put the compass heading all the way up here and the switch all the way down there to where you can't see both at the same time. I'm not a developer, don't yell at me. The upper left-hand screen is the propulsion screen. It indicates the RPM of the engine, the true ground speed, combining both the current of the ocean as well as the carrier's actual movement. And of course, the most useful thing it does is indicate launch and recovery operations with really nice symbols that indicate, without having to leave the station, going and actually looking over the side of over the runway of the deck, you can tell exactly where the Albatross is actually backing away from the elevator, turning into position, and getting ready to launch. Being able to time such an operation so that you are cresting a wave, even in rough, heavy seas, is actually quite easy to control and make sure that you can launch aircraft safely and effectively. The next aircraft is already queued, and you'll note it's coming up the elevator now. While technically there is a hold function over by the operator stations, you don't need that as long as you're paying attention. The seas don't always cooperate, and of course in an emergency you can actually ask for a hold. But for the most part, this is the helmsman's job. Being able to time it so the aircraft is ready to launch as the wave is cresting underneath the front of the carrier ensures safe operations. Rotary aircraft are much less finicky, and they will leave the moment they reach the top portion of the lift. And away they go. One thing that may confuse you if you're playing in a multiplayer game where there are multiple carriers per team, this screen will actually get confused, we'll say, and indicate what the other carrier is doing. So if they are launching and you are not, you will still get the launch indication at the bottom of the screen. Just being aware of your carrier and what it's currently doing will alleviate that from being an issue. Now that we have an aircraft queued, it's going to automatically enter the landing sequence, which once it gets close enough, it will update into landing. Just making sure that the carrier is pretty level, even in heavy swells such as this, it's very, very secure to land aircraft. You can use your navigation screen that you've got zoomed in all the way as the best indicator of how far away the landing aircraft is actually from the carrier. And once it disappears from the navigation screen, you'll note it's absolutely in final right now. Manta successfully recovered. The next aircraft will come in whenever it's available. One thing to consider is the actual speed of the aircraft trying to land. Petrols are particularly slow, and just coming to a full stop and waiting is probably advisable compared to making it chase you at full speed. So here you'll notice we have the land right in front of us that is maybe halfway between the center of the depth sonar and the outer edge of the in front of us. I'm going to start to approach at hopefully about 20 knots and show you where the alarm will start to activate, and then of course when you actually touch ground. Keep in mind though that the waves will alter this slightly, as we're not really moving per se, we're just bobbing up and down on the waves, and that's what you're seeing. So you'll note the warning doesn't happen very quickly, and you will run aground shortly thereafter, even at slow speed, like we're actually touching. There it's indicating collision. Also note, you can do some damage. I don't know how the ground jumps up and damages the Sea Whiz, but it does. One last thing you can do is adjust the alarm. Click anywhere on the depth sonar or press the E key by default to silence the beeping. I don't actually recommend silencing the alarm. It's a fairly short alarm as it is, less than the length of the carrier away from the very, very shallow stuff. And hearing that beeping might be the one last opportunity you get to rush and hit reverse or turn off the engine or something to avoid beaching the carrier completely, which you can absolutely get it stuck to the point where you cannot get it off the beach at all. Now the bottom three screens are navigation screens, and they are customizable based on your preferences and needs at the time. Let's go over the options of all three of these screens are the same. So you click on the map anywhere, and it will bring up the map mode section on the top, and then the individual options on the bottom that you can turn off and on as you like. You get one map mode per, and there's three of them, so I kind of recommend using three specific ones. I don't recommend using precipitation because it effectively doesn't help you navigate the carrier at all. Fog is slightly more useful, but it's only if you're actively trying to hide the carrier from detection. If you've got an enemy flying around trying to detect you. Granted, that's not going to help if they have radar of any way, shape, or form. So I don't really recommend using fog. Cartographic, unlike the operator screens on the holomap, you do not get the grid indicating distance. So it's basically just no option picked. So I don't really recommend that either. Now, one of the ones we use for our setup is actually wind, because we have learned to use smoke effectively. And the wind, of course, is going to push the smoke and even aircraft the way current does for the carrier. So using wind and then watching the streams to see what direction they're heading can allow you to predict where smoke would go and where best to place the smoke deploying vehicles. You also note that for any of these screens, once you've selected it, you'll note I'm moving the cursor, and in the stronger streams, it indicates the actual wind strength where the cursor is, so you can get a very, very precise reading. Like the carrier itself has a 0.6, but to the southeast is very strong wind at over 3 and 3.25. As far as what level to zoom into, I kind of like as far out as you can while still seeing the island names, because that will help with communication with your captain or operators. And for the center screen, I use ocean current as it is the most useful thing, so you want it readily accessible to view at all times. I zoom in a little bit closer than the wind screen, simply because it gives you variety, because the names of the islands and the shield count is going to cover some things, and that will give you a second option to see where enemy naval assets are, or possibly even your friendly barges and such. And for the right-hand screen, I'd absolutely prefer ocean depth, and I zoom in 100% as far as you can. This is going to basically match up with the sonar. And of course, the fine-tuning, you're going to look at the sonar for actually avoiding running aground or positioning the carrier. But you'll note anything where it's yellow or orange or red, you're going to run aground. Even in the very, very bright green sections, there are places where you can get shallow enough to hit ground, especially when the waves are flowing out. Anything outside of the very brightest green should be safe to travel. The width of the box is a good rule of thumb for trying to skirt the island as close as possible without really risking hitting anything. Now that brings us to the other options at the bottom of the screen. You'll note that there are checkboxes, so you can toggle these as you prefer. Vehicle links at the bottom of the list. That would be for, like, say, barges or ground vehicles returning to the back of the carrier, or aircraft landing. We'll get that dashed line connecting them to the carrier. That's just more information for you to have. I see no reason to turn it off. Island names can get in the way at times. It's completely optional to turn off one or even more than one, so that you can see a lot of the actual ocean, as opposed to having things covered up by shields and names. Both island team colors and vehicle team colors are pretty self-explanatory. You'll note we have a friendly barge that's blue like us, and then an enemy barge that's purple. If I were to turn the vehicle team colors off, miraculously it turns red. All non-friendlies will be red at that point. I do not recommend using it. More information is better. Same for island team colors, same concept, except for, of course, if you don't have island names on, it won't change anything for having that unchecked. And the last option is follow carrier, which basically, when it's checked, it locks the screen centered on the carrier, and you mouse wheel in and out just to zoom. Whereas if you uncheck it, then you can grab and drag the screen wherever you need to. So if you know you're heading to a specific place to assault next or defend, you can set the map on one of your screens to highlight that island, and then it won't move as the carrier moves. Something that the UI mod provides is a carrier waypoint system. When you're in the holo map, you can press R to set waypoints, and you can set them sequentially, even with the ability to remove one in the middle or even at the end. You can't stick one in between though. This makes the waypoint appear on the compass as a desired heading. Just allows silent communication between the captain and the helmsman. You will note that these waypoints are actually displayed on all of your navigation screens, in addition to the compass heading screen having the actual number. Once you get close to the actual waypoint, it will automatically update to the next one in line. Something that you can use to get into or out of tight jams are side thrusters. Once activated, instead of turning the carrier right and left, it'll actually slide the carrier right and left. Something to keep in mind though, when sliding, you do tend to turn slightly in the opposite direction. So if I'm sliding to the right like I am, I will turn ever so slowly to the left. It's not particularly fast either, at about 10 to 12 knots, depending on your current. Also, as something to keep in mind as well, maintain heading will not function while side thrusters are selected. The engine reverse key does exactly what you would think it would do. It just changes the transmission from forward to reverse. You still press W for more engine power and S for less engine power. Just keep that in mind. It's not as intuitive as you might think while you're actually controlling the carrier. Something else to consider as helmsman while on station. You have a lot of vision on different systems on the bridge. You can monitor the vehicle loadout screen from here with a right click and zoom. You can see the rightmost logistics screen, and if you set it to stock and the very bottom of the menu as I have, you can even see spare fuel. It's actually kind of useful. Of course, you can monitor repairs, power. You are in range of all of the power breakers. And on the right side, you have a variety of things you can monitor, from the AA defenses, CWIS defenses, and the cruise missile and main gun armaments. You can watch the radar and monitor contacts. The anti-air breakers and both activation switches are in range, and 3 out of the 4 CWIS breakers are in range. You'll note the far front right one is not. That's why I tend to keep that one on the most. You can also note the surface vehicle buttons on the bottom right are all green, so you know that all the vehicles are back. So if you're waiting for a virus seal to return so you can leave, once that last light starts to blink green, you're cleared to go. And the last item is the silence alarm button. You'll hit that frequently, especially while under attack. Some final thoughts for helmsman duties. I actually like to turn the screen's brightness down on most of these screens, including all the helmsman screens, all the secondary weapons screens, and especially these two back here, the CCTV and the air traffic screens, because it helps maintain your night vision without these being so bright. If they're in the normal setting, really kind of makes it difficult to spot things off in the distance. Spotting is actually one of the things you can be very good at Watch for strobes, watch for lights, keep an eye on any enemy naval units, of course. The right mouse button is your friend, but especially at night, if those screens are bright, it actually makes it difficult. If you're going to be multitasking and performing operator duties or even logistics duties, if you're in the middle of traveling and it's nowhere near an island, then absolutely you can just flip the maintain heading switch on and continue down the path. But if you have anything in front of you, be it enemy units, any kind of landmass, you might want to consider actually coming to a crawl or even a full stop before you start engaging in an operator screen, because you will get distracted and you will run aground, and that will end your game. As helmsman, you are probably one of the best defensive members of the crew. If you're being attacked, especially by something particularly dangerous, mantas loaded with bombs or missiles, you can be evasive. That is part of your job. Absolutely turn the maintain heading off. When at full speed, violent maneuvers left or right will make you as dodgy as possible. Make sure your propulsion power is at full, and violent maneuvers give you the best chance of bombs missing or even missiles, especially in heavy seas. Of course, there is actually a good time to come to a full stop. Anytime you're going to be using the 160 gun, it is very inaccurate if you're moving, especially in rough seas. The deck gun requires a stable platform to be as accurate as possible. Whether it's you shooting with the weapon scope or somebody shooting with a gimbal camera from an aircraft, bring the carrier to a stop. Alert the person who's making the shot that it's ready to go. Speed down to 0 if possible, and of course, no turning. Wait for the gun to go off and then resume your course. Picking an angle to park the carrier for any kind of operation, especially offensive operations. If you're looking at an island, granted this is currently friendly, but if it were an enemy island, you do not want to put the aircraft at extra risk when launching, for example. You don't want to launch them straight at the island, especially if you're closer. And if aircraft are in a holding pattern trying to land, they're going to be doing so primarily on the left side of the carrier, front and back. The right side is the side you want to present to any islands that contain a threat. The same would go for any naval assets in the area, especially things with anti-air missiles. Vehicles, of course, come in and out of the aft of the ship, so if you're in mop-up operations and you're getting ready to deploy the seal with the virus bots on it, then get in nice and close, swing the aft of the ship around to the beach, and then that will give it the shortest distance to exit, capture a command post, and then recover back into the carrier. Something to consider as part of your job as well is to monitor the fuel situation. There are 2 gauges. One's well placed by the developers behind the throttle. You can't see it while on station. The other one, you can kind of see it, but it's far and at a bad angle. That's why I like to put the logistics screen on the bottom of the menu so you can monitor your spare fuel from there. Once you're out of reserve fuel, you only have what's left in the tanks. Do keep in mind that all fuel used by aircraft and ground vehicles comes from the same pool that the carrier uses itself. And the last thing I want to talk about is plotting your path based on the current. using current as a speed boost, or at least trying to mitigate any reverse current if you're heading in toward the current, will save you a lot of time and make you much more efficient. Looking at the map, attacking to the north and then northwest would be much quicker than heading east. Something to keep in mind whenever you're plotting your course. The repair screen's pretty straightforward. Pretty much all you do is click on it and then you select an item to start repairs on. You can only do the one. So, typically you pick whatever's most important to you at that moment in time. Anything that's been damaged to 0% must be repaired to 100% before it'll change from a smoking wreck on your hull back into a functional device. If fully powered, the repair speed is about 1% per second. So, a minute 40 for a subsystem completely repaired. The hull is definitely slower at 0.02% per second. So it's 50 seconds for 1% only. If you're trying to repair a system and it's getting continually hit by the enemy, it will take damage, and that will of course delay the repair. As I mentioned in the power control and distribution video, the repair eats 5% for a system and 25% for hull. So keep that in mind. Anything less than the full required amount is going to be proportionally slower. If you're repairing something, especially the hull, because it requires more power, you can temporarily disable that repair with the main breaker. It will still remember the hull is selected, so that whenever you're done with whatever you need that power for, usually speed, you just turn that breaker back on and those repairs will resume. Well, I hope you learned a few things today, or at least were slightly entertained. I appreciate your attention, and thank you for watching.